inclination is to give you my best opinions I can, and then I step back from the
Thank you, sir.
policy things.
Chuck?
Chuck, based on your observation of the woods over the last couple of decades, do you think we're doing a good job of managing the woods?
Probably not, because we haven't translated it to every piece of that ownership. Are we ever going to translate it to everyone?
There's a curious thread to this conversation we've had today, because one of the prominent conversations was about removing one of the tools that allows some residents to do exactly what you wanted.
Which one is
that?
that?
Some residents have put up deer fences because they felt that that was a way of restoring the woods. And we've talked today about depriving them of part of that or all of that.
Well, I look at every one of these issues, and that's one of the bags in our tools. The reason the village culled 20 deer in 1995 is because I recommended they do it. Okay? I don't have a problem with that. It's not my job to make that policy decision. It's my job to say that's one of the tools. And if the policy of the community is to use it, fine. If the policy of the community, that's fine. So all these things got to be balanced out. And at the end of the day, the places that have the highest floristic quality don't have any fences around. Right? I mean,
that wasn't our finding.
I thought that the lot one over here had the highest quality. I'd have to look at the study.
No.
I'd have to look at the study. Obviously, but the point is, it's a tool. It's a decision you got to make. If it's a tool that you want to use, fine.
And this was the reason that prompted my request for the study. Is we know that deer is a contentious issue in our village. Sherry, we've talked about this many times. I was hoping to get observable quantitative evidence for the relative magnitude, the relative importance of canopy thinning versus deer. Because canopy thinning, I think, is one that we can address more readily. I think there'll be less resistance to it. I think some residents would embrace it. But the deer issue is one that requires collective action. And there's a lot of resistance to it in the village. And so it would be helpful to understand the difference of those two things.
But I go back to what I said initially before. There's a difference between managing the deer population for the benefit of the deer population and managing it for the benefit of the residents. I think that has to be a clear decision. It's made, and if you're, that's a policy decision you got to take a look at.
And we know there's a lot of resistance to that, and Sherry is very upfront about that.
I think, Rich, if you have to understand something, if you get to a point where you have 80 deer, 60 deer in the village, I don't think you'd have a problem with this board culling deer. But when you've got 25 to 30 deer in the whole village, I think we have a problem. Let's call it like it is.
That's not supported by the residents who have the fences.
Rich, couple things, and quick, because we're beating a dead horse right now.
We're getting off the subject. Right now, we're talking about this.
Okay, now a couple things. Can I finish?
Sure.
I'll defer.
Sure.
Or should I defer and then finish later?
No, go ahead. I just wanted to make sure people knew I was
We see
still
you.
down here.
I see you. When the RPC did its study and counted properties that had deer fences, in what way would that be different than fencing off a piece of property and then seeing what happened to it? It's basically the same thing that you just did. You're repeating the same exercise.
Well, we would also thin the canopy, which we didn't do in this study.
Okay, but primarily, I mean, because basically, if I read that study correctly, there were areas where they were going to thin and areas where they weren't going to thin. And the areas where they weren't going to thin or where were just going to be fenced, and there were areas that were going to be thinned and not fenced.
Right.
Okay, so basically any area that you're talking about putting a fence up now, you've already done that. And you've done that in multiple properties. So you're repeating the same thing in that particular case. Thinning the canopy is something else. Burns are something else. It would seem to me that we have a property that is in line now to be burned. And if that property could be watched, we could avoid the cost to the village and see what happened and see what effect a burn would have on a resident's property. We've already seen what fencing does. We've seen that. So basically, the only issue you've got left is canopy thinning. And
we're all in agreement there.
Chuck just said there's a property near Bill's that just did that, we could observe that. If those people would allow you simply to observe those properties, we could get the same kind of result over time without the additional expense to the village and the residents.
Can I make one more comment? Just kind of, it would seem to me,
And I think Chuck could do it.
it would seem to me if you could get some people to volunteer their property, okay, to do all of the other variables that they can manage,
Except for what?
except for
Water
the
table.
deer fence, or not the deer fence, okay? To me, that's the only way we're gonna separate out the fence. I don't think it's
But
important to
they've
say.
already counted those we have.
But I don't think it's important to say, thinning out the shade, dealing with the shade is 18% of the problem, and dealing with the burning that's 10%. I think the difference is simpler than that. If you look at a lot, this lady I was talking about, I also recommended she prune some trees. Because you can still leave the trees, you just gotta reduce the canopy of them a little bit to get a little more lighted. So if you went through all the steps, if you had a prescribed burn, if you got rid of the invasives, if you thinned out if you improved the shade thing, and then your study was it fenced or not? You could then kind of maybe isolate that issue, but I think there's different ways to look at it, but at the end of the day, if you need to translate it to real property, I think.
So you're saying just have two properties, one is exposed, the other one is not, and thin the canopy on all of that, and do controlled burns on all of that, remove invasives on all of that?
I think if you looked at the three different woodland types, because I don't know what they perceive the subtle differences of those might be. I don't know that I necessarily feel they're different, but I think they specifically identified three types. So it would seem to me you'd have to have some volunteers to participate. I like to get residents to participate in the program. Instead of us doing some study plots, let's get them to do it and let's look at their property like Sherry was suggesting.
Yeah, and this was done with the idea that the test would be calculated to use residents who are not paid $170 an hour. Also, we only talked about doing one test plot because we wanted to contain costs. Everything costs money.
But if you picked out the residents that want to participate and you used your grant money to subsidize the cost, I think that's probably a little more useful type information, you know. And I don't think it's worthwhile picking one lot we do the shade, one lot we don't. But to me, it's the basic management issues are deal with the vegetation itself. And in the forestry profession, you manage the woodland for your end product. But saw timber, for example, you're constantly thinning that out so the trees attain their maximum growth. Here it isn't. Here's to have the healthiest trees for the longest duration of time we could have. But we still need to strike that relative balance with density. And anybody that's going to wants to replant a new forest, you got to plant the canopy plants first to establish your shade patterns, and you start doing your understory, and you got to follow along. I mean, it's a constantly changing thing. So you know, they have their measures. You know, their measures as to what your success rate is, and you know, establishment and all that sort of thing. But to me, it comes down to all the other issues are irrelevant in terms of the political process. The ones that are most relevant to the political process are managing the deer. And it's fences, no fences, cull the deer, no cull the deer. I can tell you that when we had the program afoot to cull the deer, this room was full of people against that, full of them. And that was the soft spot then. So no, that's kind of a moving target, but at the end of the day, it's one of your management tools. It's a policy decision you have to make when you get to that.
Okay, can I talk now?
Good.
Good. Thank you. It seems to me that ultimately what we want to know is what has the most significant negative impact on the woodlands, and what can we do that would have the most positive impact? Is that not true? I mean, it seems to me that's what we want to find out. So perhaps
I think
I think
we know that.
Yeah, I would say that too. Don't you think we know that from all the other studies that we've already had?
no.
It's the deer.
No.
Canopy,
Okay,
and it's the water table,
okay, but.
and it's the people.
No,
Yeah.
and more importantly, you heard Chuck say, I know, I'm sorry, but